Yo, what is going on? Welcome back to the channel. Today is part 3 of helping our client get over 10,000 leads for one webinar just through Facebook ads. Now, in part 1 and 2, if you have not seen them, part 1 we talked about setting up the ads to be able to scale to that magnitude. We spend anywhere between $70,000 to $80,000 normally on a specific webinar, literally in 10 days, from $0 to $80,000. Now, it's not an easy thing to do, right? You can lose all of your money if you do it the wrong way. Part 2 was about scaling, right? One of the most important parts is learning how to scale so that your ads don't go completely crazy and get too expensive. If you've ever ran ads before, the biggest problem with adding too much money into your ads too fast is that they can literally go from like a $5 cost to like a $15 cost. And if ads get that expensive, it doesn't make sense to scale them and spend more money. So today in part 3, I'm gonna be showing you what we did, how many leads we actually got, because today is the actual training, and I'm gonna show you the different strategies of how we got those people to sign up. Our job as the marketing agency is to get people to sign up for the training and then to push them to show up to the training. So part 4 will be about the results that we got, how much money we made from it, and then the entire setup of how we did that. But let me jump in so you guys can see the proof. We did over 13,507 people register. Now, we do have another hour and a half or so, but it's probably not gonna change too much, right? So over 13,000 people registered for one single webinar. This will most likely bring in about 500,000, maybe a little bit more. Ideally, I'd like to see this around 600,000, but we will see what the results are at the end. So first off, let me jump into my whiteboard and kind of walk through a couple different things in the promotion styles that we use to get this many people, and then I will show you how many of them actually came from our Facebook ads and dive right into the ad account so you can see the proof. All right, so we were able to get over 13,000 people registered for one single webinar. But how did we do it? Where did the promotion come from? Did it all come from paid, or did we do anything else, right? So we were able to do 13,507 registrants. Now, not all of this came from paid, and there are many times when we use different resources. So I'm gonna go through the different types of resources and when you should be using those resources. Now, you're not supposed to just jump into paid advertising and spend $80,000 the first time you try to do a webinar. I don't recommend that whatsoever, right? So here's what I do recommend based on your level. So there are 3 ways that we typically will advertise. Number 1, we'll do organic, right? So organic is like your Instagram, your followers, your Facebook page, or you have any types of groups or anything like that. The next thing that we do is like our newsletter, right? So newsletter is like off of social media, right? So when you collect those emails and you send out blasts and newsletters and stuff like that, that's the second thing. And then we do paid, right? Most of the time when you're just starting out, you wanna stick more over here. So you don't wanna start jumping into paid. You don't wanna start spending a bunch of money if you are literally just doing your very first webinar, right? You wanna lean on your organic. Now, the positive part about organic is they are warm, right? They know you, they like you, they trust you, right? Like, know, and trust. That is gonna be huge when you start doing your first webinar, because frankly, your first one is never perfect. It is never really that great, right? So you kind of need a little bit of grace with these people, right? So they can come to your webinar, they can see you fumble and flop and maybe screw up the pitch, and they will still buy from you. They just need a reason to buy from you. They need a reason to show up, watch your presentation, and buy from you. Now, the same thing with newsletter. These people are going to be warm, right? They're always gonna be warm too, because depending on how many times you email them, they consistently get anywhere between 2 to 5 emails, maybe a week from you, right? And if they're consuming your content on a daily basis and you have good open rates, you're gonna have the same type of effect from your warm list newsletter as organic, right? Now, your organic might have a higher amount, right? Now, you may have 50,000 followers, but you might not have the same thing over here on your newsletter, right? You may only have like 1,000, 2,000 people, maybe 500 people on your newsletter. Like some of the newsletters that we use for our clients, we have over 100,000 people, right? But that's not the case with most brands, right? Most people that may be starting. Now, if you are starting, then you want to do this, and you also want to jump into this if you have a big brand, right? If you have the money and you're willing to start to dive into paid advertising, right? Now, paid is typically when you've kind of exhausted these two, right? So like if you've exhausted this and you've exhausted this, after a while, people are gonna get sick of actually seeing your promotions, right? Like there's, what is it? Gary Vee has like jab, 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 right hook, right? And if you look at TV and you look at commercials, it's about a about a 3-to-1 ratio of, or it's either a 4-to-1 or a 3-to-1 ratio of how much content you get and how long are commercials, right? And so you can't just basically be like jabbing everybody all the time. So on your first webinar, normally when you do organic, it's just a banger, right? Like you could have like 2,000 people signed up on your very first one. Then the next one, you could have like 1,000. Then the third one you could have like 500. And then what will happen is your audience will be completely exhausted, right? And so you need to be careful about how much you advertise to your organic audience, right? Now, same with your newsletter. You could end up pushing some of these people down to here and you could get maybe, let's say 500. The next time you get 200. The next time you get 100, right? And then again, this is gonna be exhausted, right? So you really have to ask yourself, how many of these people do I have on my list and how much do I want to promote something to them, right? When you exhaust both of these lists right here, that is when you need to start jumping into paid advertising. This is where you can actually scale, right? So this is how you scale. Now the problem is these people are going to be cold, right? And so what I always recommend is that if you are new or you're doing your first webinar, you want to lean on organic. So if you're new, you want to lean on organic newsletter, right? So organic, basically like, you know, IG, Facebook, etc., right? Or your newsletter. So lean on those because when you pitch, you might screw something up and these people are going to be a lot softer and easier on you. Now, after you've got your presentation dialed in, you're going to be looking at a couple metrics that you want to make sure you're hitting. So number one, you want to make sure that you're at least at a 20 to 30% show up, right? Show up. Now, on organic, you're going to probably be something a little bit higher. Now, if you're at sub 20% with an organic audience, you need to figure out how to get your show rate up, right? And I have a couple other videos that you can check on the channel that are basically all about helping your show rates and the entire setup. We're not going to discuss that here. But if you're more towards 20% on organic, you're in some trouble, right? That is a big no-no. You want to make sure you're somewhere more around here when you're doing it for your organic audience, right? And then what you also want to make sure is on the presentation, you need to be either selling or booking at least 10% of the people that show up, right? Show ups to sale or call, right? So some of our clients do calls, some of our clients do sales directly on a webinar, but you need to do at least 10%. If you're sitting somewhere around 5% on organic audience, you need to keep trying. You need to keep trying, testing and testing and testing and testing because you do not want to go into a paid audience of cold traffic who does not know who you are and try to sell them something that didn't work on the people who like, know, and trust you. Because if it doesn't work on them, it's not going to work paid, right? Now, for somebody who's already dialed that in, that's when you can jump into paid, right? And so there's a few different avenues of paid advertising. The one that we like to use, obviously the most, is Facebook, right? So Facebook has been the best for us. You get the cheapest cost per lead in comparison to, well, the cheapest / best quality in comparison to some of the other ones. The other one that we use sometimes is TikTok, right? And TikTok actually gets a cheaper cost. So it's low cost, but it's also low quality, right? Most of the people that come from TikTok, they aren't showing up as much. You get a very, very, very low cost. So what we look for is, first off, what we'll do is we'll launch with TikTok, right? Excuse me, with Facebook. And so if we see Facebook, for example, at a $10, let's say FB is at a $10 cost per lead. Then if I launch TikTok, TikTok needs to be about half at about a $5 for me to make it worth it to scale inside of TikTok. Now, if I happen to launch in TikTok and this is like an $8 cost, it's only 20% lower, then I'm not gonna scale on TikTok, right? It needs to be at minimum 50% in order to waste my money in TikTok because you're going to get a significant drop in the amount of people that show up and the amount of people that are actually serious, right? And so again, my favorite is Facebook. So keep that in mind when you're going to launch and you have a Facebook, you have a TikTok, you're going to get lower quality people in TikTok. You're going to get a better quality person on Facebook, right? So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna jump into the actual ad account so you can see how many leads we got just from paid advertising. In this one, we did not decide to jump into TikTok. Facebook was scaling very, very well, and I always like using Facebook more. We get a higher quality audience. So let me jump into that. All right, so again, what we did was 13,507 leads signed up for this webinar, right? Now, how many of them actually came from Facebook? Let me jump in to our Facebook ad manager right here. So you can see we ended up launching 5 different campaigns. Each of these campaigns typically have different videos in them, right? So the first thing I'll do here is kind of jump into each one so you can see like what ended up happening over time, right? So this is the very first batch. If you go watch video 1, part 1, this is the first batch that we launched. Now, ads don't always survive the intense 10 days that we put them through, basically, right? You can see if we jump into here, majority of our ads are off, right? All of these audiences scaled for a while and started to slow down. So you can see their cost was very good, but towards the end, they started increasing above $10 to $12. Some of them were $15, $20. That's when you have to cut them off. And this is why it's really important to have a lot of creatives. It's important to have more creatives than less. Like if you only have 5, 6 creatives, you're good to probably spend like 5, maybe 10K. But if you get into the big dog strategy where you're doing $80,000 plus, you need to make sure that you have at least 20 creatives ready to go so you can cycle through these because they will die off, right? So in each of these, we typically will have 3 to 4 different variations of ads, right? And inside of those ads, we will typically have 3 to 4 different body copies, 3 to 4 different headlines, right? And we went over this in part 1, so you can go back to that one if you want to look kind of how we set these up. And then each one of these has a different batch. So this one is batch 2, this one is batch 1, this one is a real batch. This one right here is batch 3, right? So each of these, remember, each of these have anywhere between 3 to 4 different videos in them, right? So we had like 4 videos, 3 videos in this one, and we had 4 videos in this one, right? So you can see that's 12, 17 videos that we used. Now, this one right here is actually a little bit different. We used a lead form. Now, the reason that we use lead forms is because as we start to scale these ads up, we start to get a higher cost. And what lead forms allows us to do is kind of pull that cost down. But the same thing that I talked about with TikTok is a little bit the same with lead forms. The way that we look at it is that if somebody takes a little bit more time to, let's say they go to a website, they enter their information in, that's a more engaged lead, right? That's somebody that took the time to write their name, email, and phone and gave that to you to become a lead to sign up for the webinar. With lead forms, they make it really, really easy to where like they can click a button, all their information auto-populates, bam, right? So that we consider a lower engaged lead, which means that those people are less likely to show up. We usually see a little bit lower show rate, but depending on the cost, in this case, you can see we had a $5.80 cost, right? Most of our other ads were doing about $8, $9 at scale. When we started, they were actually at 4. Let me show you what it looked like day 1, right? Day 1 right here, we had a $5 cost per lead, right? As time goes on, as more money gets pumped into these scale, right? So these start to increase in cost. And so as you can see, between all of these, we sat around like about $8. This one got a little bit more expensive, but again, in each of these, you can see how many we've cut off here at the bottom that did not perform well. So you have to make sure that you're consistently optimizing your ads and cutting off low performers and increasing the highest performers, right? And so the lead form, basically what we do in this case is we actually take our best performing right here. So this was our best performer, and we end up turning it into the lead form, because if we're going to use lead forms, we need the lowest cost and we need to take our best performers and use them in a different format. You don't always have to use the same exact format. These are all website leads, people going to a landing page, but when we use Facebook leads, as long as we have the best performers that we know are going to perform, we can then say, okay, if we're getting at least a 30% decrease in cost, we are good to leave these, because that will help us get more leads at a cheaper cost. Even though they're not as qualified, they are still very qualified. They're just a little bit less engaged to where a lot of them may not show up. But we hammer them with email, SMS, which in the next video, in part 4, when I go through the results, I will show you the steps of what we do to actually hammer these people to get them to show up. Because even if we get somebody who, click information, bam, they get an immediate text, they get an immediate email, they're getting emails and SMS all the way up until the training and during the training, right? And so you can see between these, let me open up what's called Hyros here. So if you guys ever use Hyros, this basically kind of shows you the amount of leads you get. Let me go through this. So you can see with these 11,205 plus, we ended up getting 1,500 right here. So this updated because it calculates all the campaigns. You can see I have these ones segmented here. So if we go in here, it should update the correct amount of just these. And this will be around that 11,000 mark, right? So 11,225, right? So 11,225 just from Facebook, right? Then what we also had here was another 1,500, right? So 11,000 from these. This is the one going to the page, and then a 1,500, right? So you can see we literally, let me see, I did the math here earlier. We literally did 12,702 leads just from paid ads, right? And you can see the grand total here, $105,000, 295, right? Crazy, right? So if you've ever spent that much money, let me know in the comments if you spent over 100 grand on one webinar in just a sprint of 7 to 10 days. It's not the easiest thing to do. So if I do the math on that real quick here, basically 105,000 divided by 12,702 is an $8.28 cost. $8.28, spending 100K in 10 days is a phenomenal cost, right? This is one of the better ones that we've done. A lot of times when you get to the point where you're spending 80, 100K, you're gonna be around like a $10 cost-ish, right? But if you can stay sub 10 at $100,000 in spending literally, let's see what we spent yesterday. Let me just show you what we spent yesterday. We spent $15,000 yesterday just on this webinar, right? And so at scale like that, without a long period of time to optimize, if you were doing this for like 3 months, then like, yeah, you may be able to keep a low cost, but smashing that much spend into such a short period of time, it's very difficult to get a cost around like an $8, right? $7, right? So when we launched these, you saw it was like $5, right? So over time, it starts to increase. And so that's what you can see. We did over 12,000 leads just from the webinar, just from paid, just from Facebook, all through the ads right here, right? The rest of it was actually through the newsletter. So this client has got some issues with his Instagram right now, and unfortunately we weren't able to use his Instagram, which probably would have put our total above 15,000 leads. It is what it is, but we had to push the budget. Originally what we wanted to do was we wanted to spend, let me see this month so we can track it. We wanted to spend 70 to 80,000. Because of the Instagram issue, we had to spend $105,000. Now, if this 105,000 turns into 500, 600, 700,000, we're good, we're happy. But again, that also comes down to the client, comes down to the presentation, comes down to the people with the book, comes down to the salespeople taking those calls. And so part 4 will basically be a little bit down the line here. After we've had the webinar, after the sales calls have been taken, I can give you an update on how many calls came in, what those KPIs look like, like how much money we actually made from it, how much revenue, how much cash collected, and you can see if this was worth it. Now, I hope it's worth it, because if it is worth it, we obviously make more money, client obviously makes more money, everybody is happy. So if you've enjoyed this, let me know. Stay tuned for part 4, where I will basically show you everything that happened on the webinar and after, the actual results, so you can see, did our money go where it needed to go? All right, talk soon, bye.